One.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show. Today I've got Kirk and Jonathan with me. How's it going, guys?
Hey,
Good.
Pretty good.
Very good. So, we've got a couple of topics for today, but the main one is a breaking piece of news that's really just come out in the last few hours, which is the death of Alexei Navalny. I think he's probably pretty well known to people, but in a sense, I think his profile has diminished a little bit in the last few years since he's been in prison. So, just for anyone who doesn't recognize him by name, Navalny was, in a sense, the leader of the official opposition in Russia for many years until he was imprisoned a few years ago on what I think it would be fair to say many people regarded as kind of trumped up charges. Reasoning just before he was imprisoned as well, with a nerve agent called Novichok, and he was a lawyer, a kind of anti-campaign and anti-corruption campaigner, and all that kind of stuff. And it's been reported that he's died today. The actual cause of death isn't actually known quite just yet. He's in a prison, supposedly that's somewhere near the Arctic Circle, in a way that seems very kind of Bond film like, a way that's kind of a bit strange. Um, and there's been a flurry of statements which have come out from world leaders, from his wife, from the Kremlin. So it's just in a very short space of time, there's been a huge amount of activity about this stuff. But I want to hear what you guys think. So, Jonathan, what do you think about Navalny? What do you think about his death and so on?
well, the cause of his death is one word, is Putin.
Mhm.
As you said, this is someone who was in prison on completely trumped up charges. I recall this is someone who was poisoned maybe a decade ago by Putin because he was a critic. And it reminds me very much of what Miss Rand said. I don't know exactly when. Somebody in the chat might remember the quote she said about the dictatorship, and one of the hallmarks of dictatorship being the elimination of freedom of speech, political speech. And that's exactly what Putin has done. Now, what's Tucker think about it? Does Tucker love this? Tucker, who just we talked about it a week ago, was in the Russia. Oh, how wonderful things are. I mean, this is the reality of things in Russia and any other totalitarian regime, of which I consider North Korea and unfortunately many others around the globe. So this is just a terrible tragedy, but it's exactly what you get with a dictator like Putin.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was
and
about to say the same thing, Jonathan. I mean, yeah, say what you will about Putin and his, alleged suppression of opposition, but look, they have really nice coin-operated shopping carts at the grocery stores in Moscow. How do you explain that? You don't see any of that in America these days, right? And they have cheaper groceries. So yeah, the silence of political opposition. Yeah, I'm not okay with that, but you see that here in the West and other countries. But hey, look, nice coin operated shopping carts and escalators that carry your shopping cart between the multiple floors. Isn't that nice? Why isn't the media telling you about that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean it's sometimes you think about, and I think as Americans and maybe even as people in the UK, it's like the idea of being arrested because of political speech. I mean, I remember when the war first started, anyone who's in Russia, anyone who spoke out about it was arrested, certainly beaten up. In fact, there was one particularly memorable scene of a guy who was just holding up a blank sign. They took him in, and it kind of again it echoes Miss Rand's comment about something that seems to be less and less important, at least in America, the importance of speech, importance of the protection of freedom of speech. And for Putin, that's just an afterthought. And this guy was one of the few voices of opposition. He wasn't, as I understand it, maybe Morgan, differently, but he wasn't, setting off car bombs. He wasn't ransacking people's homes or firebombing anything. He was speaking out. And in Putin's Russia, that gets you killed.
yeah, and so I don't know any different than that. What's been interesting about having a look at the reactions since the announcement of his death a few hours ago is on Twitter. There's been a hugely polarized reaction, and it relates a little bit to Tucker, which I think maybe we'll talk about Tucker a little bit as well, because I agree that it's kind of relevant here. And so there are people who are kind of lamenting his death as a kind of human rights campaigner and a kind of symbol for a martyr for free speech in effect. And then there are some people who are saying remarkable things for which I've never seen any evidence, which is that he's a neo-Nazi, a nationalist campaigner. Now, the idea that he might be a nationalist in the sense that he might be kind of very pro-Russia doesn't surprise me very much. But the suggestion is that he's this kind of unsavory fascist kind of figure. And if that's, if they could provide some evidence of that, then there's no problem with that. But they provide nothing. This is just an allegation that comes out. And of course, Russia has made all kinds of allegations of neo-Nazism against Ukraine, which are, again, rather trumped up in order to suit their purposes. And I have to wonder whether these people are just being a bit partisan because they view it as advantageous to their political cause, whatever, to support Putin. And that's something really strange that we're seeing on the right.
I mean, Putin specializes in propaganda. I mean, the entire Russian media is complete propagandists, and on the other side, and look, I don't know too much about Navalny, but I did watch a documentary he made, I think 4 years ago, called Putin's Palace.
Yeah.
And, he unveiled this redonkulous palace that Putin has built for himself somewhere on the Black Sea, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars of, Russian people's money and the entire corruption of Putin. So, I mean, I don't know. The term Nazi is
but Jonathan, have you seen their subway stations? Have you seen their subway stations? Aren't they
Kirk,
nice?
You have a video out today about Moscow and Tucker, don't you?
Yeah, I just put out today. I streamed it yesterday on Twitch. It's called "Is Life Really Better in Moscow Than in the United States?" And I'm reacting to a lot of Tucker Carlson's segments over the last few days coming out of Russia. And I was not expecting when I went to hit publish today that I'd read the news, unfortunately, that Alexei Navalny died while in prison. And also, I read this Wall Street Journal article today that is like not just that he got in prison and died, but he was tortured when in prison. I guess guards would like wake him up like every hour by making loud noises, and they really wanted send a lesson, I guess. And I will say, earlier I was joking about, oh, well, we have free speech issues or suppression here. Like, there are some legitimate free speech issues in America that need to be worked out. And from what I can tell, we still have a healthy system of checks and balances that are, really helping to alleviate those issues, settles those issues. You have this Missouri versus Joe Biden case, which I think has to do with the Biden administration's attempt to, pressure social media companies to censor in pursuit of stopping the spread of misinformation, which is totally not the government's job. But I would say let's not try to conflate a broken finger with a decapitation here. It seems like things, for all the problems we might have in America, and they're worth discussing, they're not. If it's true that a Navalny was arrested, I know the Russian government denies any involvement in the poisoning that happened in Germany, or they say, oh, well, he was, charged on extremism or whatever that means. I think I saw Sky News. He was serving a 19-year sentence on charges of extremism. I mean, that just sounds insane that a government would arrest and imprison someone for that long based on some sense of extremism. That's blatant, naked suppression of speech right there, and it's nowhere in the ballpark is what we deal with in America.
We did a show when the war first started about conscription in Russia, and Miss Rand was obviously vehemently against conscription, the draft. Her acolyte was part and parcel responsible for helping get the draft abolished in the Nixon administration. But in Russia, Kirk and Morgan, you can get imprisoned for anything you say. This story came out this week. This is not a joke, that Russian teens faced 5 years in prison for making a snow penis. This is no joke. They made a big penis out of snow. They're going to prison for that. And that's certainly not political speech. But, when you don't have the ability to speak your mind, they can put you in jail for anything. And, Putin has made it like a second, it's like his primary responsibility, it seems, to put dissent in jail. All the radio stations have been closed. All the newspapers have been closed. So anyone who speaks out, gets put in the clink.
Yeah. And so we've been referencing Tucker Carlson a lot. And if for anyone who's not seen Carlson's videos, that have been coming out in the last few days. When Kirk's referring to coin-operated shopping carts, there's this video of Tucker going around a Russian supermarket, which looks completely ordinary and, to be honest, a little bit run down, just a touch. And he's talking about how amazing it is, how much better it is than American ones. I guess maybe coin-operated carts aren't a thing in America. I guess they're completely normal here, and the shopping cart he's using looks like 30 years old. But and also
they use those carts at there's a chain in Los Angeles called Aldi. I guess it's a European-based grocery store chain that there are locations in America, but they have these coin-operated carts. And on top of that, there are these new like the thing that Tucker liked about it is like, oh, it incentivizes people to bring their cart back so they don't take them to their homeless encampment. But there are other anti-theft measures on carts that like force the wheels to lock if you like take it too far away from the store. So the sense I got from that is that Tucker Carlson does not do his own grocery shopping if he's this impressed by technology in Russia that already exists in Europe and the United States.
Yeah, Aldi's German, and we have a few of them here. And let me just say, we have that coin-operated technology here, and kids still nick the trolley carts and ride them down hills. You know, it's not this amazing kind of ingenious incentive that he was making out. And in effect,
let's say it was like a really amazing shopping cart. Let's say it was like, do you want to live in a society where they can literally pull you off the street for any reason? You know, like, is that worth a great supermarket or a great subway? I mean, it's like in Carson, we talked about it. It's like so disingenuous for him to go in as an outsider. They bring him around to show him all the good things in Russia. He can say whatever he wants. It's not going to get affected. And, this was another journalist, another, a political advocate in Russia who got poisoned, then got put, as you said, Kirk, in probably the worst penal colony in the country, and ultimately killed for speaking his mind.
Yeah. And someone, I can't remember who it was, but made the point then, in fact, when Carlson's doing this basically propaganda puff piece for Putin's Russia, did it cross his mind that people in his profession in Russia couldn't do a kind of hard-hitting interview of Putin, which is not what he really did, but that was what it normally was meant to be. And we're seeing someone who really did try and speak truth to power, so to speak, and who has basically been murdered for it. And it's such a shameful thing for Carlson to be doing what he's doing. And there's a clip, I don't know if you guys saw it, when he's doing his first kind of post-interview speaking at this thing called the World Government Summit. The guy is asking him, why didn't you ask Putin about freedom of speech? And Carlson makes this amazing statement about how leadership requires killing people. And now in a vague sense, you might kind of say, well, you command armies, whatever, that kills people or something. But it's used in this way to kind of brush across, to make a moral equivalency between dictators and the leaders of free nations. Well, some people kill more people, some people kill less, blah blah blah. Basically, completely disregarding the evil that Putin's doing, and it looks especially bad now. The Navalny's what seems very clearly to have been killed. And
jump in, someone in the chat has said, objectivists are talking about everything but objectivism. I don't think that's the case at all. The whole situation actually in Russia reminds me of what was said to Rand as she was leaving Russia at a party. People can Google the story. A man said to her, tell them in America that Russia is a cemetery and we are all slowly dying. It was what was said to Rand as she was leaving Russia. And I look at this and I think it's the same thing. It's just a cemetery. Maybe they're dying in a separate way now. It's like intellectually and spiritually, but the culture hasn't changed in 100 years.
Yeah. And
you know what else we have in America that, just going back to the shopping cart discussion, you know what else helps to scur or encourage people to bring back their shopping cart? Are YouTube channels called CartARS, where these CartARS go around and they encourage people to take back their shopping cart, which often results in funny segments of people getting bent out of shape for 5 to 10 minutes over being too lazy, being a bunch of lazy bones, as they call it, to return their shopping cart, which can only happen in a country where free speech is respected and protected.
Yeah, and to that person saying that objectivists are talking about everything except objectivism, of course, Ayn Rand thought that philosophy was to be applied. So you want to talk about it in various contexts of what's going on. And one of the quotes that I saw people bringing up in the last few days was from her essay, The Monument Builders, which is one of these really great little essays, which is in a sense on kind of a niche topic, and yet comes to mind so often when you're looking at the news from countries like this. And she includes a bit in it where she talks about the Moscow underground and how it's built by Stalin and is kind of beautiful in a way. It's very Soviet realist, so I think actually looks a bit kitsch. But yeah, sure, it looks kind of it has a kind of grand style. And she has this kind of line about how it's actually dripping with blood, and it's really affecting, and people should go read that. And so when people like Carlson are making a kind of apologia for the Putin regime, which is killing its political rivals because of, oh, look how beautiful the underground is. You should see those white tiles and those mosaics as running with blood of people like Navalny. And so,
yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about the pyramids. People say, oh, the pyramids are so wonderful. It's like, all built by slaves. And as you said, the same thing. I mean, I'm inspired by things like buildings that, work, that do something, and that people were hired voluntarily to cooperate to build. Not as you said, I mean, Morgan, the subway that Carlson thinks is just the shit, is built by blood. And if you wanted to fix the American subway, all you'd have to do would be to privatize it.
yeah. And so, and a way in which that there's a real philosophical issue here, which is relevant to objectivism, and which we've kind of been talking around a little bit, is tribalism, I think. And I think that's what's at the root of some of the reaction. Because why are you seeing such a polarized reaction to somebody who is either, based on the reaction, if you were judging by that alone, either this human rights figure who's really a noble campaigner, or is a neo-Nazi? These things are incompatible. He can't be both, really. And why are you seeing this? Because people are being tribal about this. Another one of these tweets that I was just looking at, in the response underneath, so someone was lamenting his death, and someone tweeted back, "But I bet you love the Clintons." And it's a completely tribal way of approaching this. This guy, I think, did do a number of noble things in campaigning against corruption. He made that documentary, which I saw as well, Jonathan, where he exposed, I think, is it 8 billion or something, that this Black Sea palace that Putin had, and that was very shortly before he got poisoned and then arrested. So when people are approaching political issues in this way and you're getting this stark response, one of the reasons that you should wonder is, are people being tribal? And I think very clearly the evidence is yes. That's also why Tucker is doing this kind of apology for a dictatorship. Was there any other aspects of this that stuck out to you guys?
I have two more aspects I want to tackle with this story. One, to really bring this back to free speech, I think this is a legitimate free speech concern in places like America. So Navalny was getting poisoned and, attacked on soil outside of the Russian borders. And I think this is not the first time that Russia under Putin has persecuted journalists and opposition outside of Russian soil. And, I brought up on previous shows on here about how Iran has been doing this with the fatwa on Salman Rushdie and their attacks on Masih Alinejad. We saw this back in 2014 with that movie, The Interview, with what's his face, Seth Rogen, and who is the other guy in that movie?
James Franco.
James Franco, thank you. And I remember when that movie came out, North Korea was going out of its way to threaten movie theaters were refusing to not show the movie out of like intimidation of like what might happen. And there was like a whole hack on Sony's computer systems, which is alleged to have come from North Korea. There was another example. I mean, Comedy Central also refused to air an episode of South Park because they were afraid of backlash if they were to show a depiction of Muhammad in animated form. And so we have like Russia, North Korea, Iran. And I think this is a legitimate free speech issue that not enough people are talking about. I don't know if I'm out of the loop on like horror and action movies, but I think this is a good premise for like a horror or action movie in today's world, where like a hostile foreign government maybe kidnaps or tries to take out like an American journalist who is a little too critical of them. Something else with Navalny.
I mean, that's happening in real time with the Journal journalist, right? The Wall Street Journal journalist who
Yeah, Evan
I didn't
Gershkovich,
read his
yes.
work, but my sense is he wasn't a political advocate. He's writing for the Wall Street Journal. I mean, that's my sense. But I mean, he's been in jail for what, 6 months in Russia?
Yeah, something like that. Um,
Another thing with Navalny, and this is putting politics aside, I started watching this HBO documentary from 2022 called Navalny. And I only got through like 20 minutes of it, but it's like showing like footage of him doing like little things like playing a video game on his phone, this shooter game, and then it's like we know he ends up in prison and he decides to go back to Russia. You could say maybe out of an act of bravery. This is the sense I get from it. He was like going back to Russia to show that he's not afraid and maybe to like maybe inspire Russians to not be afraid and come out and oppose of Vladimir Putin. We know how that turned out, and I'm over here wondering, did he make the right move? If if objectivism is all about trying to live the best life possible, I know that's very hard to do in Russia, but he was outside of Russia. He decided to go back, and it's like he gave up his life, and now he's dead. And Russia is still under the boots of Vladimir Putin in this brutal dictatorship. So it's like, you could say it's brave and heroic, but at the same time, now his life is gone, and I hope it's not in vain, and it looks like it is, unfortunately.
yeah, I never really got a full sense of why exactly it was that he decided to go back, because he almost certainly knew that exactly what he was going back to. And there was a tweet that I also sent to you guys by Richard Hanania, who is a bit of a dubious source nowadays, given some of the revelations about him, but who had an interesting point, which is that people on the right are kind of looking for these strongmen kind of representatives or heroes. And Navalny, if you really need one, is a pretty good one. He showed a tremendous kind of courage, not just in the sense of going back, but in the sense of campaigning against a regime which he knew didn't play by the rules, basically, that would do anything to stop him if they really needed to. And that seems to be exactly what they've done. Interestingly, another one of the responses was from Mike Pence, who tweeted out that there's no room in the Republican Party for apologists for Putin. Now that's a few years too late, Mr. Pence, since you were kind of working for one for quite a while. But better late than never, I suppose. I also think,
and sorry to go back to your point about like Tucker and what he said at that government summit about like, well, all leaders kill people. This is very similar to what Trump said in his interview with Bill O'Reilly. I think it was his first Super Bowl interview, if I recall correctly. Or O'Reilly was pushing about Putin. He's like, you seem to like Putin, but this guy's a killer. And Trump's response was, well, we've killed people too. Do you think we're so great, just kind of dragging America in the mud with countries like Russia? Make America great again, I guess.
yeah, there's a real kind of cynicism in that kind of attitude, isn't there? And it draws a moral equivalence, which is completely unwarranted. One of the things that you mentioned, Kirk, was that he had been poisoned with the same kind of nerve agent. And I'm not sure exactly how they know. I presume it's because when he was analyzed outside of Russia, but Novichok, which he was poisoned with, there was something that the British government identified as what was used in the Salisbury poisoning, which I've mentioned on the show a few times. And the fact that Russia seems to keep using this nerve agent, I think belies a truly kind of blasé attitude about these kind of attempted assassinations that they're undertaking. Yeah, we'll use this agent. Who cares whether, international governments figure out that we're using the same thing? It's not even like they're trying to hide it. They're using the same weapon as before.
Right. I mean, it's almost like a joke. It's almost like a joke how many critics of Putin die. They all fall out a window or fall down the stairs. I mean, it's like a movie, Kirk, to your point, but it's in real life. Like everyone who opposes him, oh, an accident. They were only 33 years old, but all of a sudden there was an accident. They had a heart attack. Just like that's who Carlson thinks is just the shit. I don't get it.
Yeah, well, I think those kind of propaganda videos he's been making in the last few weeks or so, or last few days, really. I think you can see in them someone who is almost really trying to convince themselves of the position. Or when he's speaking at this thing, the World Government Summit, he almost looks a little bit uncomfortable saying what he's saying. Not completely, but he doesn't say it he's saying it in a kind of irritated way, as if he's having to justify himself. And yet people aren't really putting him on the spot. It seems like he's trying to justify it to himself. Otherwise, he seems like someone who's quite uncomfortable speaking, which is a bit weird considering he makes his living doing that. I mean, and the aspect of this, which I think is also weird, is that the right is so apologetic about all this stuff. The right, of course, are people who campaign for kind of national sovereignty and believe very strongly in this kind of thing. And yet Russia is a country which goes about completely trampling over the sovereignty of all other nations around it. It's impeding on the sovereignty of Ukraine to determine its own future as it wants. It was impeding on the sovereignty of the UK by sending agents in to assassinate people on its grounds. There's something completely arbitrary about the way that power is ruled in Russia. And I have to assume that the people who really want to make apology for this government, actually what they really admire is the arbitrariness of the authority, because Putin wills it, therefore it will be. And that's what they really kind of get off on in his style of government. And that's what's so appalling about it. Is there anything else?
You have to be insane to go visit Russia. I mean, you remember the basketball player that they jailed for I don't know how many months because she had like a little vape pen, like a little weed vape pen. They put her in jail for like a year. I mean, like, why would you want to go there? Why would you want to associate with, if it was a political leader, Putin? Why would you want to be in the same room as him?
Yeah.
Yeah, her name was Britney Griner, or is Britney Griner. She's still alive, but yeah, we got her back. But she was the basketball player who got imprisoned in Russia over like a petty drug charge, essentially, from what I could tell.
Well, and that's so common with a lot of these countries. And unfortunately, my experience with Russians, particularly with slightly wealthier Russians, is that it isn't that they kind of have the thumb of the government pressed on them and they're hating it. An awful lot of the ones I've interacted with, and this is a sample size just of my interactions, but is that they really kind of like Putin. There's something about him that they enjoy. They really view him as sticking up for their interests. And so kids I went to school with would tweet out on Putin's birthday, "Happy birthday, Mr. President," and they'd tweet these pictures of him, looking very slick or something, kind of photo shoot. And then, so that was when I was younger. Then just very recently, I was speaking with a young lady who clearly came from a well-off Russian family, and the topic of the war in Ukraine came up, and she got instantly very uncomfortable. And it wasn't because she was embarrassed by what her government had done. It was because she wanted to be more kind of assertive about supporting it, and got the sense that she couldn't really do it, and was kind of edging around it, talking about how the Ukrainian language is sort of invented and how the real language is Russia and all this kind of stuff. And you just really got the sense that what she wanted to say was, look, Putin's justified in doing this, and people in the West are overreacting to all of this stuff. And
here's the stat: December 2023, this is from Statista, 8 out of 10 Russians approve of the activities of the Russian president. So 80% of people in Russia approve of Putin.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a shocking statistic, really, and it's a shame that it is really that high, because there have been some high-profile kind of protests in Russia that we've seen over the years. Pussy Riot, the most famous kind of individual example, but even people protesting on the street, there is clearly a kind of resistance which Navalny was a figurehead for. And not only did they, shuttle him away to this jail around the Arctic Circle, but and throw him away for years on trumped up charges of extremism. I think initially also the initial charges was something like contempt of court and missing parole, something like that. But clearly, putting him away like that wasn't enough. He had to be killed because presumably he was still a figurehead. And that clearly just can't be tolerated. And although there was no excuse for it anyway, for the people who are making apology for the Putin regime and for Russia, and who want to go there and make videos saying how great they are, I think there is just no excuse anymore. You can't get away with this. So if you're Jordan Peterson and you kind of want to make things which are suggesting that Putin has justification, or some of the journalists who I'm thinking of who are kind of saying that the people in the West are overreacting a little bit, Russia's actually a justified party, there's no way you can really make that case anymore. And I don't think you could anyway. But I think this is really the final nail in the coffin of anyone who wants to say that kind of thing and be treated like they're sane, rational people, because it's completely ludicrous at this point. But okay, guys. Yeah.
I'll just quickly say I saw there was a Pussy Riot documentary maybe like 10 years ago. And, those women were speaking out against this a while back. And I believe they are all still alive. But, really interesting to see, Morgan, to your point about, pockets of opposition to Putin over the years. They've all been stuffed out one after the other.
Yeah, 100%. And unfortunately, um, it did seem during that brief kind of rebellion by the leader of the Wagner group that Putin's power was shaking. And maybe in the long term, actually, it is. And it's just hard to see for the moment. But at least in the recent time period, he seemed to be firmer than he was at that time. And he doesn't seem to have declined in the way that I think we might have hoped that he has, which is a real shame. And hopefully it won't stay that way, but we'll have to see. But okay, guys, anything else, or should we move on to our secondary topic? Yeah, okay. So for something else that we're covering in the news, which is directly more pertaining to Israel, is the raid which has been going on for the last little while with the NASA hospital. And this is something which is, like the death of Navalny, prompted a huge reaction from the international community, let's say. And I wanted to talk about it as well because there's been a huge focus on hospitals in this war. It's been a real focal point for kind of moral outrage and discussion of Israel and whether Israel's acting properly. Earlier in the war, of course, there was the Al-Shifa hospital, and I'm trying to remember, I don't think it was the Al-Shifa hospital was the one that was accidentally bombed. I think Al-Shifa was where the weapons were found behind the MRI machine, if I'm remembering correctly. And then was it the Al-Aqsa hospital, maybe, where Israel was initially blamed for bombing it, and it actually turned out to be a misfire, I think, from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and so on. So hospitals have played a large role in the way that people have reacted to the war. So I wanted to get, so what did you think about this raid that's going on in NASA, and what do you think about people's reaction to it? Do you think it is telling in any way? Jonathan, we'll start with you.
All of these hospitals, Morgan, to your point, are full of weapons. They're full of Hamas fighters, and thus that makes them targets. And just give you a sense of who Israel's dealing with. They're dealing with militants who will go, as you said, Morgan, hide their weapons in a hospital, hide behind women and children, build their headquarters beneath a hospital because they know Israel, will at least hesitate to attack them. I'm glad, hospital doesn't mean what we think it means in the West. We think of a hospital as something, they think of the hospital as just another military installation for them. And, Israel does not go around targeting hospitals as much as, the anti-Israelis and the anti-Semites would have you believe. But when Hamas puts weapons there, puts militants there, they should get bombed, and bombed hard.
Kirk, what did you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's important to consider, a little to John's point, like why people do get outraged when they see these headlines and stories that I'm guessing drop a ton of context of the IDF having to go into hospitals and making rescues or maybe targeting hospitals. Because when people think of hospitals, they think of these large buildings that are really, they're all about preserving life, saving lives and whatnot. And so if it becomes the target during a war, yeah, I can understand why people might be a little outraged, especially if they don't understand the full context, especially if they're dropping the context that Israel did not start this war. Hamas did. And Hamas clearly has genocidal ambitions. And Israel, I was watching briefly the other day, Destiny was debating with Mark Lamont Hill, and they were getting to the minutia of like whether or not it's a war crime. Like if a soldier or if a military commander is in a hospital, is it right to, strike the hospital or even do a precision strike where they send in a raid? But what if the military commander is unconscious or whatever? It's like, well, it's like a military commander. It's like what can you do? And at the end of the day, Israel has every right to defend itself and destroy its enemies. And if there are any civilian casualties in this war, those deaths, the blood of those deaths are on the hands of Hamas because they started this.
And the civilians that continue to support Hamas among the Palestinians, of which there are plenty.
Yes, unfortunately, the evidence, I think, supports that very much so, Jonathan, that it's not it's not like Hamas is this kind of warlording government that's lording over its population. It does enjoy popular support so far as anyone can tell. I agree with you, Kirk, that I think an awful lot of what goes on with conversations around hospitals in the war involves a lot of dropping of context. Because as we've seen already, we know that hospitals have been involved in supporting Hamas. Not only have weapons been found there, but the staff had to be complicit in some way. And there have been reports from some Western doctors who briefly came in and worked at some of these hospitals that suspicious people were coming in and going to areas of the hospital which were out of bounds. And when they asked about it, they were told, "Don't worry about that. Don't ask about it. It's not for you to know." So staff in the hospital were complicit with Hamas. It isn't like there's this complete separation of it. And I don't know about anything particular at this NASA hospital yet. I guess we'll see what the Israelis find afterwards. But presumably they think they have good reason to go in, which is what they felt like they had before, and they found all those weapons. And also, what's very clear from their actions is that the Israelis don't go around deliberately destroying hospitals in the way that is sort of alleged against them. That's something that their spokespeople make very clear. And as we know, they didn't deliberately bomb this hospital was alleged against them initially. And yet somehow the international community in responding to this drops all of that context that there have been weapons and sort of collaborators working in hospitals and that Israel hasn't destroyed them. And what we're seeing is that basically threats levied against the Israeli government by members of the UN, by Western leaders who are supposed to be Israel's allies, that if they go into the NASA hospital, then there will be repercussions in this kind of vaguely ominous way that's alleged against them. And it's a real tragedy. Jonathan, you look like you have something on.
Yeah, I mean, it's my Twitter feed for some reason thinks I want to see all this anti-Semitic propaganda now, but one after the other is like, Israel bombed this civilian's family. Israel annihilated this hospital with these poor doctors. I mean, like, think about it. Hamas lobs totally unguided, dumb bombs, rockets into Israel. They land anywhere. Civilian, they land anywhere. Israel sends pamphlets. They drop all over the area, of which it's full of militants or fighters. Israel says there's going to be a attack here tomorrow afternoon. Get out. I mean, what other country in the history of warfare has ever afforded that type of sensitivity to so-called civilians? So, Israel's fighting with one hand terribly behind its back. It's not because it's militarily weak, because it doesn't have the consistent support of those in the West who should know better.
Yeah, Israel holds itself, but is held by the international community to a standard which no other nation I've ever seen in conducting a war. And in a sense, it's an incredibly self-sacrificial standard. But and really, I think the way people should think about it is if they really wanted to bomb the hell out of this hospital, then they could do. And yet they aren't, because they view it as their responsibility to not kill the injured people inside, which I think we can talk a little bit about the mistakenness of a kind of altruistic standard in war. But at the same time, there is a kind of, I guess, a benevolence and or at least a lack of cruelty in not wanting to kill injured people, even if it's mistakenly applied in this context.
The Israeli culture, as I've experienced it, I've been there 3 times, generally values human life.
Yeah.
Their hospitals treat Arabs, treat Jews. I don't think you can say the same thing about the Palestinians. As certainly not that of Jews or non-Muslims.
Yeah, and another aspect, I guess, of hospitals being a relevant part of the war in Israel was, I think it was a week or two ago now, there was a kind of special ops, in whatever you'd call it, an operation into a hospital in the West Bank by Israeli special forces, who went in disguised and went in and killed people who were terrorists. And the story wasn't that Israel has managed to take care of terrorists. It was kind of these disreputable, sneaky Israelis have dishonorably gone in disguised as civilians in order to murder people inside a hospital. In a way that just, I think, belies the bias against Israel when it comes to international reporting on them. why does special forces disguise themselves very frequently? Why is that actually an issue? And I think it belies the moral context that people are bringing to it, that they're so outraged about this military strike that happened in a hospital. The fact that it was viewed as kind of so in a way kind of violating the sacrosanct space of a hospital for the soldiers to go in and to kill these terrorists, which was sort of really bizarre. Kirk, was there any other aspect of this story that you noticed?
No, I have nothing to add to this story.
Fair enough. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate our audience supporting what we're doing here. I mean, we've covered the war extensively in a way that's very unique. We're taking a real important philosophical look at it. And as always, going back to Miss Rand's perspective, going back to her writing, that's what we're always trying to do here, is apply Miss Rand's ideas to the world at large. And we can only do it because of the support of our YouTube subscribers and subscribers on the channel as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can wrap up the show then, if we've come to the end of the second topic. Thank you so much for watching, guys. We'll be back on Monday with the reality show and TDO. Oh, Daniel's telling me.
Now, hold on. The title of this show called Russian Election Season Starts. So I thought we were going to make predictions on who's going to win the upcoming elections in Russia. Is it going to be Putin, or are we going to see the upset of the century? What do you guys think?
I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I don't think I would be betting a lot of money on this. Would you be betting money on this, Kirk?
Depends what the odds are, I guess. And who knows? Maybe Putin might fall out a window next month. I don't know.
Well, that would be extraordinary. He'd have to be, I think, throwing himself out the window.
He's going to clone himself, and then he'll get pushed out of a window.
We'll have to see.
That's another thing. I guess Putin said Russia's working on some vaccine to cure cancer, and suddenly a lot of the anti-vax asshats are like, oh, well, this sounds good because we know it's not made for profit by big pharma or whatever.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
So maybe they do have the medical technology to clone Vladimir Putin so he can be eternal or whatever. And then he's going to push his old self out of a window so he could establish his power.
Daniel's letting us know that throwing people out of a window is Czechoslovak cultural appropriation. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. I could imagine Putin would probably like to get involved in Czechoslovakia. Not that that exists as a country anymore. But unless there's anything else, guys, Daniel's saying that we have a Briefly Objective video premiering at 7 o'clock, which is called UNRWA, the Strongest Ally of Hamas. So everyone should go over there and check that out in just 15 minutes. Kirk, where can people go and find you?
You can find me, Kirk Wilcox. Just search me on YouTube. And yeah, I just put up a new video today talking about Tucker Carlson and his fun times in Russia. So check that out.
For sure. That sounds very timely. And Jonathan, where can people find you?
My new book is Can You Really Love a Dog? New essays by Dr. Leonard Peikoff. It's available at Amazon.
Cool. And people can find a link to my Substack in the description as well. I'm just working on an article at the moment, which is about Carlson in Russia, and it's comparing him to Walter Duranty and Gareth Jones, and making the case that he's much more like Walter Duranty than Gareth Jones. So people should go check that out when it comes out in a day or two. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. TRS Extra will be on Sunday, but we'll be back with the main show on Monday. So we'll see you all then.